Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Jay Campbell is a global authority in hormone optimization, peptides, and human longevity. He is a five-time international best-selling author and the co-founder of BioLongevity Labs, often referred to as the Amazon for biohackers. For more than 2 decades, Jay has been at the forefront of metabolic health and anti-aging science, helping millions elevate vitality, repair their biology, and take control of their health. What sets Jay apart is his rare ability to cut through misinformation and translate complex biomedical research into practical, real-world strategies. In an industry flooded with hype and shortcuts, Jay is known for his integrity, evidence-based approach, and direct, no BS clarity. His work blends cutting-edge science with a consciousness-driven philosophy, optimizing biology while elevating mindset, identity, and purpose. Jay is the author of his latest book, Metabolic Awakening, which tackles one of today's biggest health crises, the global misuse of GLP drugs. He introduces the first responsible, science-aligned framework for safe microdosing GLP peptides to support long-term metabolic repair rather than temporary weight loss. Jay Campbell, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Casey, that was an amazing bio. I know that my one of my podcast production teams wrote that and you kind of read it out, but that's the first time I've ever actually heard it like that. So I was like, God damn, is that me?
Yeah, and I had to cut it down a little bit. I had to edit it down to fit our time frame.
No, honestly, man, it's an honor to be here with you today. I'm always privileged and humbled to be on with people who really are making a name for themselves in the space, and I'm grateful to be here. So this is going to be an awesome podcast.
Well, I'm really grateful for you and all your amazing work. I didn't realize this until researching, your work and jumping in. We actually have a really interesting connection and a mutual friend, Scott Mislinski.
Yeah,
I
Scott, I
didn't
love Scott.
realize. Yeah,
That's
Scott's
awesome.
amazing. When I got into carnivore in 2019, I really didn't know what I was doing, and so listening to him and his amazing podcast, Carnivore
Yeah.
Cast, at the time was so helpful. I ended up hiring him to help coach me through a few things. We were able to meet a few years ago, and I know he had some crazy health stuff that he had to go through. His hormones were completely wrecked after doing so much competitive rowing in college, and I
Yeah.
didn't realize that you were the one that actually helped him the most. And so to hear the episode that you did recently on his show and have him thank you for all of your amazing work personally for him, I thought was amazing.
Yeah, it's funny, right? It's I kind of think, where we are now, you've obviously familiar with the whole 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon stuff. Like people find each other relative to their frequency. And I feel like anybody who's had a hormone crisis, imbalance, deficiency, ultimately in some way, shape, or form finds themselves either connected to me through my books, my authorship or just, my online persona in some capacity. And so we always just reconnect each other. And look, we can talk about that today. I always say this to people. Hormone deficiency is the single greatest crisis that we have in the world right now. And it's a completely undiagnosed crisis because our medical establishment, as you know, is not qualified to deal with it because they don't learn anything about hormones in medical school. And why would they, Casey? I mean, the medical establishment doesn't want people to be hormonally balanced or optimized because if they did, then the pharmaceutical industry dies. It's that simple. Nobody is sick who has optimized hormones. Obese people, insulin, dysregulated people, metabolically deranged people, they all have a hormone deficiency as the underlying root cause of what is really causing all their problems. But the medical establishment doesn't diagnose that. The medical establishment gives them drugs. And then they give them more drugs to placate the symptomology and the side effects of the other drugs. And it's just a circus, dude. It's really, really sad. Very few people who understand the path of hormone optimization and hormone balancing. And whether you do that naturally, which is becoming harder and harder, which you still can do, but it's harder, or you use the biggest tool in the tool belt, which is obviously therapeutic hormones and therapeutic peptides, et cetera. That is the key to long-term, call it, health and happiness. It's literally that simple. You will not find a 70-year-old man or woman who is amazing and robust and healthy who doesn't have optimized hormones. And again, whether they do that naturally or therapeutically is their choice, but that's the way it is. Everybody who isn't is bent over, decrepit, obese. I mean, look, I always say this now, like it's getting weird if you fly commercial because there isn't a benefit anymore to being in first class because there's so many invalid people. And these are not sick people, bro. These are just aging boomers, just call it that, who are decrepit because they don't do anything about their health and they're not hormonally balanced and optimized and they can barely get out of their goddamn plane chair, and it's a very sad situation where we find ourselves in our society today. But dude, this is literally the American food system. This is the American food supply. This is the sick care allopathic medical system. These people are a product of their environment, a product of the system. And it's like, if you want to be like them, then don't listen to anything that you and I are about to talk to on the show. But like, obviously, the things that I talk about nowadays are critical to long-term health and happiness.
Wow, that's amazing. I remember a few years ago when somebody pointed out to just walk through any parking lot and notice how few available handicap spots there are. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've
Exactly,
never
dude.
noticed that. You go to Costco and
Exactly.
all the handicap spots are taken.
I mean, dude, I fly a lot. And in the last 3 years, it has become insane to be in the front of the plane and not get off for 15 minutes. Because you've got the wheelchair attendees coming down, you've got people who aren't even paying for to be there sitting in the front of the plane because they can't fucking walk and they're not sick. Look, I'm not. This is not an attack on people that are disfigured or have uh, muscular dystrophy or anything of these things. These are just aging men and women who have let themselves go. And look, dude, I don't want to blame it all on them. I understand my mom died of obesity. She was labeled a COVID death, but she was obese. She was obese the last 25 years of her life. But these people literally are a product of the American food and drug system. It's that simple. The food is contaminated, the water is poisoned, the air that we breathe is poisoned. If you do not take severe and serious actionable steps to avoid what they want you to be or use, you're done. And that's where a lot of people in America are like, and you just said it, parking lots, fuck, go to airports. Look around. These people are walking corpses, dude. You do. And look, let me say this because this is important. And again, I dealt with this with my mom, and I wrote the book, the new book, which we'll talk about, Metabolic Awakening with GLP peptides. Because, bro, I truly do have a personal desire to end obesity. By year 2032, that will be the number one killer, all causal health of anything in the world, more than heart disease, more than cancer. This is where we're going. Our society is sedentary because of technology. They eat, again, poison food supply, poison water, everything is poisoned. And so if you do not have the agency and of course more importantly the education to avoid this, to be proactive and to, avoid the sick care medical system, I mean, bro, that's the path that you're on. I mean, that is a very slippery slope, but there is no avoiding that. And so you have to take agency for your health. And as you've heard me say, and I say this a lot now, like you have to become the proactive scientist of your own health. Your family care practitioner, doctor, functional health person, they're not going through your medical records. They're not looking, at your, genetics or your age-related, potential, DNA imprints that say that you may or may not have this. Like it's all incumbent upon you to take proactive, action and to be somebody who avoids that system. And honestly, bro, like avoidance of the system is the only shot you have. Because if you go in the system, the statistics say that 70% likely they're going to kill you, whether it's through their medications, their exploratory procedures. I mean, it's insane. I mean, like, again, if you're a very conscious, free thinking, as I call sovereign empowered free adult, you have to be spending a lot of your time preoccupied with the idea that I cannot go into the medical system, that I have to live insulin controlled. I have to optimize my hormones. I have to think about using therapeutic peptides, bioregulators, small molecules, all these amazing golden age tools that we now have at our disposal. And I have to, more importantly, all that, I have to become educated on how to do it because my doctor can't help me. It's as simple as that.
Wow. Yeah, man, that is so well said. I really appreciate that approach and opinion. And some might find it a hot take, but I think you're absolutely right. Once you're in the system, it's going to be really hard to get yourself back out because it's meant to keep you there.
Exactly.
You mentioned it a few times. Plus, you mentioned like being ignorant of stuff. I've been in personal training for almost 2 decades now. It's only in the last like 2 or 3 years that I've heard people talk more and more about peptides.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, the latest trend. I don't know what this is. I can remain ignorant about it. This is going to like tail off at some point. And it's to the point that more and more people are talking about it. All I know is that there's lots of letters and numbers, and there must be thousands and thousands and thousands of peptides because some are called L753M,
Right.
whatever. So, but it's becoming this like amazing tool and something you've used for a very, very long time. So
Yes.
I wonder
Yes.
if you could educate a bum like me. What are therapeutic peptides?
So you're not a bum, number one. But number two, yes. So again, and it's crazy for me to say this because I just did a podcast with Brad Jensen before you today, and we were talking about this, and he's an OG too. He's been using peptides since 2014. I started using peptides 11 years before him. Him and I were marveling at that. We're literally thinking like, dude, he's like when I was using him, it was like, looking over my shoulder. This is a gray area. Like I don't want anybody to know. I'm not telling because he's a coach too, a trainer. He's like, I'm not telling anybody I'm using these because I'm buying them on the internet, etc. And he's like, and then I think about you, and you're 11 years before me. So I mean, like literally fast forward to now, 2026. I mean, bro, what is that? That's 23 years ago that I started using therapeutic peptides. And again, yes, I was using, underground research chemicals, which they still are the same thing today. They've just become more, notarized. And the good suppliers like my company, BioLongevity Labs, like Peptide Sciences, like Core Peptides, like Peptide, Simple Peptides, the legitimate suppliers, we're no different. And people get mad when I say this, but we're no different than a compound pharmacy. We have the same, you know, certificates of authenticity, chain of custody, batch numbers, lot numbers, third party verification, independent laboratory verification. I mean, we do a lot and spend a lot of money to make sure that our products are literally the highest, most purified quality products in the marketplace. Lyophilized in the States, finished in the States. People need to understand that almost all peptides come out of China and India. Soon, we will be manufacturing much more in the United States. But again, it's always just been, as you know, dude, it's cheaper to manufacture in these countries. They have the ability, they have the manpower, they have the scientific expertise and prowess. And so it's just been the way it is. But now in the United States, the best companies are finishing and lyophilizing in the United States. And so, anyway, to your question, peptides are basically organic signaling molecules, or for people that understand what proteins are, chains of amino acids. The longer the chain, the more likely it has to be injected to be efficacious, systemically in the human body. But they're literally found in nature. Like, for example, BPC 157, which stands for body protective compound, is actually a natural occurring peptide in gastric juice, human digestive metabolism juice. And when you use this peptide, it speeds the rate of healing, like dramatically speeds the rate of healing. And there's, you said it, there's literally, that is true what you said. There are thousands of peptides, but commercially available, there's 57. And what I mean by that is that there's 57 peptides that have been synthesized by chemists, in labs around the world to be used right now, either through pharmaceutical supply chains or for research use only, which is what my company is. We can get into that. I don't think it's that important, but if you want to ask me questions about that, we can. But the truth is that peptides actually, no exaggeration, they represent a fundamental attack on sick care allopathic medicine, because sick care allopathic medicine, as you know, doesn't treat the underlying root cause. It treats symptoms and band-aid symptoms from, again, big pharma, Rockefeller medications, which are literally made out of petroleum distillate oil. So when a petroleum distillate medication breaks down in a human cell, in a biological system, in the bloodstream, it literally creates residue and ultimately byproducts and side effects. And so this is what we have: is the allopathic medical system literally gives people drugs that then when they break down in the system cause other problems, side effects, symptomology. And then so what they do is they prescribe more drugs to address the side effects of the other drugs. It's a nightmare. Whereas peptides literally, and bioregulators and small molecules, they absolutely address the underlying root cause of disease, dysregulation, disorder. And so, like, for example, if you use BPC 157 and then its accompanying peptide, which is called thymosin beta 500 or TB 500, you can literally heal a sprained ankle, a sprained wrist, a sprained elbow, a torn, labrum 7 to 10 times faster than if you just went down the typical allopathic, rest, ice, elevation, compression, right? So it's like most people, and again, dude, the statistics are like this because I just did a documentary about this. It's coming out either later this year or next year on peptides. Only 1% of society even knows what the fuck a peptide is, right? So like you and I are in the space and people are talking about them and they're feeding our social media or, crowding our themes or excuse me, our feeds. And so we think it's much more ubiquitous, but it's really not. It's still a very fringe thing, but it won't be fringe for much longer. As you know, literally in the last 10 days, RFK appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast and he said, we're rolling back the class 2 restrictions of peptides, which were put in place by the FDA in 2003 in September, so that they're now class 1, which means they're prescribable by any doctor. So we are going to see a circus over the next 3 to 4 and maybe even 6 to 8 months of clinicians and functional health doctors and personal trainers and coaches rushing into the space to prescribe peptides because again, everything I just said about them is true. They truly do treat the underlying root cause of issues. And so if you become educated on this and learn from people like me, you can actually dramatically improve your clients, dramatically improve your patients, and obviously take them off of the reliance of, again, allopathic petroleum distillate medications, which only cause side effects and never resolve the underlying root cause.
Wow. Thank you for that explanation. That makes it a lot more clear. 57 that we are able to manufacture. Are these 57, do the 57 have 57 unique kind of benefits? And are there some that are more important than others? Like, for example, you mentioned the BPC 157. Are there, a handful of them that are like, these are the ones you should really focus on? These others, we don't really know. Like, how do we look at those 57 different peptides?
So, I mean, basically, the 57 peptides all do address different, underlying issues, right? Like you have healing peptides, like I just mentioned, BPC, TB500. You have cognitive restoring or enhancing peptides, like a cerebrolizin, like a Selenk, like a Cmax, like a Dihexa. There's others, P21, Atomax. Then you've got fat loss and muscle building peptides like growth hormone agonist peptides, like a tesamorelin, like an ipamorelin, like a CJC1295. Then you've got like mitochondrial optimizing peptides, like 5-amino, like a MOTC, like a SS31, which has actually now been patented and called a lamipretide, NAD plus. And then you've got your anti-aging or longevity peptides like thymolin, like epitolon. There's others. And so you've just got this giant, like, call it amalgamation of various peptides that all address different things. And, to your question about like, are there better peptides than others? Also, there's the GLP peptides, which we're obviously going to talk about, which are for appetite suppression and metabolic stimulation, which, by the way, are the greatest drugs really in the history of pharmaceutical interventions or pharmaceutical science. And that's by sales and also just by, all the published research and studies, which I talk a lot about in my books on how effective they are. And unfortunately, just to rabbit hole for a second, 95% of people who use GLP peptides do it incorrectly. And we can get into the reasons why that is. But again, you've got those 95% of society that are using these peptides. And by the way, that's the main source of exposure for the average person to peptides, right? A GLP. That a lot of them don't even know what a GLP even means. I mean, dude, I did this test for myself in December in Vegas at Longevity Fest in Las Vegas, which is like the biggest anti-aging convention in the world. I literally went to all the compound pharmacy booths and I said, I asked people that were working there, I said, do you even know what GLP stands for? 0 out of 16 different compounded pharmacies that I interviewed knew
Wow.
what GLP stands for. It
Wow.
stands for glucogen. It stands for glucogen-like peptide. And if you understand what glucogen is, or glucagon, however you want to say it, is it basically is a it's a hormone, a metabolic hormone, and in times of fasting, we stimulate more of it. So it obviously has a component that increases metabolic rate or increases metabolism. But bottom line is that when you stimulate glucogen, you can stimulate metabolic rate, and that's why they're called GLP or glucogen-like peptides. But the bottom line is, dude, is that those peptides have been around since 2006. They were in their infancy and they were very crude back then. But, in the beginning of my book, which again is called Metabolic Awakening with GLP Peptides, which we can talk about, I have one of the world's leading prescribers of those drugs. He was using them with his obesity patients in 2007 and 2008. So he writes the foreword to my book and really goes deep about the clinical literature and also talks about how amazing these things are, but also says that, again, it's very unfortunate, but the majority of prescribers for these drugs are doing them incorrectly because they're listening to pharma, right? And again, as you know, pharma is a business. They're not about health, they're about profit. And so they're going to teach their prescribers, their doctors, and of course, functional medicines and NPs and PAs who can prescribe that we want to start people high and then and titrate them their dosages higher. So when you do that, you blow out their receptors, you cause all the side effects that we hear about in the mainstream news, which by the way, I talk about in the book, they're all true, but they all 100%, Casey, can be avoided and completely minimized if we do this right. And again, we can get deeper into the weeds of like how you do these things right if you want. But you know, the real truth is that they're amazing drugs. And ultimately, if they're prescribed correctly with education, which the majority of prescribers don't have, because again, it's against the pharmaceutical company's interest to teach people how to use them correctly, because then they don't make the money. Because if you do them correctly, you use a microdose and you change your lifestyle, which doesn't line the pockets of Lilly or Novo or any of these big pharmaceutical giants. So again, you understand that, you know, their conundrum is we created these amazing drugs, but at the same time, we're not into making people healthier. We're into making money. And so making money and making people healthier are two diametrically opposed things. Right. So you have to understand that about the pharmaceutical world. So it's like I don't talk shit about the pharmaceutical manufacturers because they made these amazing drugs. They have some of the best scientists and chemical formulators in the world. But at the end of the day, their goal is not to improve health. Their goal is not to increase lifespan and health span. Their goal is to sell drugs to sick, fat, diseased, metabolically deranged people at the highest cost and at the highest dosage possible, right? Because that's how they make the most amount of money. So, like, once you understand that, and that's what this book talks about, now you can unpack how do I avoid these side effects? How do I avoid these high dosages? How do I change my lifestyle to what Jay Campbell recommends so that I can dramatically improve my life? And look, I want to say this because it's true. I have a chapter in the book called The Transformations. There's 16 men and women from all walks of life who have used these drugs to dramatically change their life, not just in their before and afters. You know, I've got 400-pound men who went to 180 pounds with six packs. I have 275-pound women who went to 130-pound women with six packs and, you know, great physiques. But I have in their own words what these drugs did for them in their life. And this is what people need to understand about GLPs. It's not just losing weight, suppressing appetite. Bro, it's literally changing brain wave patterning so that it's permanently eliminating the addiction that they have to like the food chemicals, right? Like, you know, there's lots of studies on this, the hyperpalative addiction of food science. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars, these big agri companies, getting scientists to create these chemical addictions in the French fries and the Chick-fil-A's and the McNuggets and all of these things. And so these people, in their defense, are not just lacking willpower, they have a predisposition genetically or biologically to be addicted to these chemicals. And so if you use a GLP correctly, and again, this is all discussed in ad lib in the book and beaten to death exhaustingly, you can literally change the brain patterning and you can change and cure them of this addiction. And that's why these drugs are so powerful. And that's why we have to, me, you, people like us, we have to educate the masses on how to do these correctly. Because, bro, I'm not joking when I say this. If we can educate and scale the knowledge, we can eliminate obesity. 100% these drugs can eliminate obesity forever from this planet. But right now, there's no incentive, A, from the pharmaceutical companies, and B, from the providers, the clinicians, because they don't get paid. They don't make the money they need to support their practices and, you know, pay their bills. And, you know, again, you can't disparage them, right? They've got mortgages and bills and college tuitions. But at the end of the day, if we do it right, we can help society. We can end obesity and insulin resistance, which again is, like I said, in 5 to 6 years, going to be the number one cause of death in the world. And we can also obviously get to a place where people don't have these issues anymore. Because, dude, it's not going to get better from a food supply issue. It's not going to get better from the air we breathe, the water we drink. Everything is becoming more and more contaminated. You know what I mean? So it's up to us to truly educate the public and really teach people like how to use these drugs correctly. You know, and that's a long-winded way of saying, you know, from your original question about peptides, like Are they a flash in the pan? Are they truly representing a fundamental shift? And obviously, I'm a shill, right? Because I sell them, I speak about them, I write books about them. But again, as a guy who's been using them for 23 years and compare them to the normal, call it allopathic sick care, illness medicine pathways, it's a dramatic change and it's a transformative change. And again, it really represents a human. Do you become, transhuman and beam your consciousness up into the AI cloud? If that's what you want to do, good on you. That's not me. Or do you become sovereign, empowered, and free and become the proactive scientist of your own health so that you control and take agency for your health? And these tools, again, they're tools. They're not easy buttons, they're tools. Make it that much easier for you to avoid the system.
I cannot believe you lost us Chick-fil-A as a show sponsor. Thanks a lot. Amazing explanation. Thank you for explaining all of that. So again, strong statements in there to say that this can end obesity forever. Can you
100%.
tell us, that's wild to me. Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution, how these drugs have evolved? And along with that, can you tell us a little bit about the mechanisms of how they work, why they work?
Yeah, so for sure. So basically, again, glucagon-like peptides, it stimulates well, let's actually break it down very, very lay. So you've got three classes right now. And by the way, I write about this in the book in the bonus chapter at the end of the book about all the drugs in the pipeline. So I can talk about these GLP-1, GLP-2, GLP-3s right now and rave about them and show the research and talk about how amazing they are, again, when used correctly. But they're nothing, Casey, to the stuff that's coming. There's bigger, better, more efficient, better quality, more productive stuff coming. So it's like, even when I talk about the best ones now, which is like tirzepatide as a GLP-2 or retatrutide as a GLP-3, they're going to be irrelevant in 2 years. That's how incredible this quote unquote golden age of pharmaceutical science is. And, call it, whatever you want to call it. I call it a biomedical golden age. But so GLP-1 is what most people who are familiar with GLP peptides and a lot of people that listen to your show or your audience, which is semaglutide or Wegovy. That's the commercial name brand. And it's truthfully right now almost useless and irrelevant because it's a stage one. And what stage one means is it suppresses appetite and does nothing else. Now, as a stage one appetite suppressing drug, it has its benefits. It's also massively infiltrated into the pharmaceutical science supply line. So, right, if you have benefits, you probably can get a very low cost, benefit co-payment, and you can get that drug. But here's the thing. It doesn't improve metabolic rate. It doesn't improve nutrient partitioning. It doesn't improve insulin signaling. It does none of the things that the GLP-2s and the GLP-3s do. And so my opinion, obviously, I'm not a doctor. I just play one on podcasts, is that it doesn't have the value or the clinical benefit that the other two have. However, if you are in a third world or a fourth world and you can get it from your provider and the other two are not available, then sure, use it. But again, it has to be used in a microdose, and almost no one uses it in a microdose. They take it a high dose and then they go up higher and higher every week or every 2 weeks until eventually you blow out the receptors and you have all the side effects that you talk about. So GLP-2 is tirzepatide, or what is known as Mounjaro and Zepbound. Those are the commercially available brands. And same thing, it suppresses appetite, and it's the best appetite suppressant that we know of right now. There's other things in the pipeline coming that are probably as good, but that right now is the number one appetite suppressant. But, and this is why it's so much better than semaglutide, the number one, the GLP number one, is it also improves glucagon production, which stimulates metabolic rate. So while you're sitting here, you have reduced appetite and your metabolism is faster. So you're going to burn more calories at rest and you're going to eat less from the appetite suppression. So great drug. Look, I used it for 2 years in a microdose. It's amazing. I loved it. But then retatrutide came out in 2023 and I started using that in a microdose. And it's way better. And why is it better? Because it's GLP-3. So in addition to suppression and glucagon stimulation, you also have an increase in nutrient partition and insulin signaling. So it's like hitting the holy grail components and phases of fat loss and metabolic stimulation. So when you use a microdose of retatrutide, it's amazing because it also does the things that I talked about earlier, which is change brainwave patterning. So check this out. And there are hundreds of studies demonstrating this. If you have an addiction to porn, an addiction to gambling, an addiction to alcohol, an addiction to weed, an addiction to sugar, dude, it changes the brain waves so that it permanently cures those addictions. It literally gets rid of these negative tendencies in the mind. Now, remember, a lot of these people have these addictions due to the hyperpalative nature of these chemical ingredients in the food supply. So now, if you change the brainwave patterning, again, serotonergic, dopaminergic, synaptic, and dendritic pathways in the brain, you can literally stop this mind of like, I'm addicted to McDonald's fries or McNuggets or, let's our friends at Chick-fil-A. And so it's like now you permanently cure that. Now these people are not eating these, again, hyperpalative addictive foods. And so instantly they stop eating shit. And the other thing, which is crazy, is once it changes the brainwave patterning, it actually makes their brain crave healthier food. Go figure. Right. So it's these things are amazing. But as I told you, bro, like I just gave you a quick lecture on GLP-1, 2, and 3. GLP-4 and GLP-5 are coming. And GLP-4 will have all those three amazing qualities, and then it'll have myostatin inhibition, so you'll build muscle. So you'll avoid muscle loss. You'll avoid the slowing of metabolism that many people experience because they do everything wrong when they take GLPs. They don't eat enough protein. They don't ensure that they're hormonally optimized. They don't lift weights. They don't do cardiovascular. And they obviously don't sleep well or mitigate EMF or even change their lifestyle from, living insulin controlled and remaining metabolically flexible. So it's like you start adding in that, and now you're going into GLP-5, which is also in the pipeline, which is going to actually increase brown adipose tissue in the upper back. So again, you're just going to have these amazing chemicals that if you use them correctly, and again, that's the biggest problem is education, there will be no obesity, bro. People will not be fat. They will not be addicted to sugar or weed or alcohol or vape. That's where these are coming. But again, we must educate the species starting in the clinical space on how to use these so that we can have those things. And again, at this point, there's nowhere close to that because they don't want doctors teaching people to be healthier. That's not what they want. They want sick, fat, diseased humans who are addicted to their pills and addicted to their high dosages of the GLPs because that's how they make money. It's as simple as that.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. Okay. You mentioned it a few times, microdosing. What exactly does that mean?
Yep.
And how does that contrast to how most people take these drugs?
Okay, so this is an important question. So 95% of people take these drugs at the pharmaceutical recommended dose. So how this works is the pharma rep comes in from Lilly or Novo or insert any giant pharmaceutical giant, sells the doctor on this product, again, the GLP-1, 2, or 3, and says, if you take it at this level, this is what will happen. And then it's like, it's just a sham from there because then at that point, it's like, and then by the way, 10 days later or 7 days later or 14 days later, we have to double the dose. And then 7 to 14 days later, we have to double the dose. So, bro, what is happening to these people's receptors is they're being completely shocked. They're dealing with all, again, these side effects that you hear about in the mainstream news, Wegovy face, Wegovy neck, Wegovy ass, muscle collapse, hair loss. And why is this happening? It's not the drugs. The drugs just cause the massive appetite suppression. And there are some other side effects that they cause systemically, but it's the people not changing their lifestyle. So imagine being an average person who does none of the things that we talked about here tonight, who's trying to lose 25 pounds. They're eating shitty American food, probably addicted to certain fast foods, emotional eaters, if they're men or women. And they go to their doctor and they say, I want to lose 25 pounds. And the doctor writes a script for Wegovy, semaglutide. And then they say, you start at 2.5 and 2 weeks later you go to 5. And then now you're at 10 and it's like, Jesus. So, and again, I have all this in the book. I go through all of this, what Joe Public or, sister, the woman of Joe Public, what they experience and how to avoid all this. But I mean, basically, dude, in 2 weeks, they're not eating any food anymore because their appetite is gone. So they stop eating protein. They're maybe eating one. I mean, I'm not joking when I say this. They're maybe eating once or twice every 2 days. So, I mean, as there's going to be metabolic and call it thyroid and just haywire by screwing up your metabolism. And so what haywire is hair loss. It's muscle collapse. It's the butt caving in. It's, again, you see some of these people on social media, they look like the Walking Dead. Their face collapses. And again, this is all avoidable. This is all just misuse, overdose, and not lifestyle change. So the answer to your original question of a microdose is it depends on if the person has been exposed to GLPs incorrectly, as I just demonstrated initially, and now is starting without, virgin receptors, or if they've never been exposed to GLPs and they do have virgin receptors. So this is something that very few people understand. And again, this is all, shown and demonstrated in the book. It doesn't matter whether you're a 400-pound obese man or a 180-pound man who wants to lose 10 pounds. A microdose of any of the GLPs, if you have virgin receptors, is going to work equally as well. Very few people know that. They instantly think, oh, if I'm fat and I'm insulin resistant, I'm metabolically deranged, I need to use a much higher dose. It's not true. The receptors in the brain and in the metabolism and in basically, your call it your blood supply or your central nervous system, they all work equally well, whether you're 400 pounds or 180 pounds. So if you're giving them a microdose, and again, a microdose is anywhere from for women, it's like 0.1 to 0.15 milligrams, 2 or 3 days a week, to higher, maybe double that dose for men. Whereas like if you're using tirzepatide or retatrutide, you're taking like 0.25 every other day, then you will get all the benefits and none of the side effects. And here's the other thing that I want to say in this podcast that's incredible and all in the research and all justified in the book. If you start off with a microdose, which again, almost 5%, 95% don't, all the research shows this, you maintain the weight loss, you maintain the fat loss. So all these people starting off, again, the 95% with these super high dosages and going up, dude, they all fail for all the reasons we just talked about, right? Metabolic hell, muscle loss, thyroid damage. And so all of those people rebound, weight gain, and balloon and go like this, yo-yo, because of what they've done to themselves. So again, if you do microdosing and of course change your lifestyle, and again, we already said it, but I'll say it again, 1 gram of protein per goal body weight, right? So if you're 400 pounds as a 5'10" man and you should be 180, it's 180 grams of protein and not 400, right? Are you hormonally balanced and optimized? If you're not, or you don't know, get your blood work done, right? Very important because they're very powerful drugs. And if you're not metabolically optimized, hormonally optimized or balanced, you can lose muscle. That's how effective they are, especially if you're doing wrong dosing, which is, again, 95% of people. And then the other two things, which are very important, is obviously, as you know, as a trainer, resistance training, cardiovascular training, and then ultimately, and maybe all four of these are equal, are you living insulin controlled and remaining metabolically flexible? And obviously, the heavier you are, the more insulin resistant you are, the more you have to regulate your insulin, the more you have to regulate your carbohydrate consumption, right? So like all these things require a trainer. They require a clinician that understands, again, how to use these correctly and efficiently. And thankfully, there are enough people out there that do understand this, but unfortunately, there's not enough of us yet. And so obviously, my book aims to be an educational resource on how to, A, avoid the pitfalls and the mistakes that 95% make, and then B, and most importantly, how to live the lifestyle, use the microdose, and then do everything else that obviously you can use, like peptides, like bioregulators, like small molecules, in the context of living longer, stronger. What I say, living leaner, stronger, and longer.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Question on the protein recommendation. I couldn't agree more. That's what I recommend for most people. And I would say most people that even are not taking this drug have a tough time getting up to that much protein. Most people think they're consuming a lot of protein and they're not even in the ballpark. For somebody who's taking a drug and is experiencing that appetite suppression, how challenging is it for them to get that much protein?
So it is. Obviously it depends on the person. I find you are right about what you said. I find that 95% of women, even without GLPs, are protein malnourished. They don't eat enough protein. This is why you have massive bone mineral and spinal compression issues in 60-year-old women plus. They end up, bending over, osteoporosis, osteopenia, sarcopenia. They have all these problems because they are not lifting and they never eat enough protein in their whole fucking lives, right? So that's a major issue. But to your question, microdosing does not suppress appetite that much. So you always know when you're dosing appropriately, when your appetite is just barely affected. So if you are taking too much, which again is 95%, remember, then you're not even going to want to eat. And here's the problem, and this is something that needs to be understood. If you're fat and metabolically deranged, and you don't have any clue about any of the things that we talked here today, which is again, majority of the American public, bro, if you're taking a high dose of a GLP, you start seeing the weight fall off in the first week and you think it's great. This is working. Yes. But you don't realize that you're literally causing hell to your metabolic pathways and systems. And within 7 to 10 more days of doing what you're doing, you're fucked. Right. So again, the educational process has to be, we start with a microdose. We realize that our appetite will not be affected that much. We will have curing of brain pathways that will make us want to eat shit food. So now we're curing that. We're using a microdose. Our appetite's not much disturbed, but we're desiring cleaner, healthier choices and options. So then it's like easier to your original question, to eat 3 solid meals a day and to get a couple of protein shakes. You know what I mean? So it's easy to do this, but it's the education that has to come in, and also the avoidance of high dosages, because the high dosages will make it virtually impossible. And that's what ends up happening to most of these people. To your point and to your question, they can't get enough protein in. They literally are nauseous to even eat. And that's why I always say, like, whenever you hear somebody who tells me, "Oh, I can't eat on GLPs," it's because their dose is too high. Because, dude, I've been using GLP since 2021. And really, actually, 2020, I started using semaglutide, Wegovy, literally in November of 2020, and, experimenting. And of course, again, the doc who mentored me, who writes the foreword for the book, he taught me about microdosing this because, dude, he used it in obese patients for 14 years before that. So he knew. But so I learned the right way. I had the right mentorship. And that's what my goal with this book is to truly go out there and mentor the public, mentor the doctors who are truly into self-actualization and taking massive action into doing this right. Because, dude, everyone can learn in this book. I don't care if you're like a 10-year prescriber, there's data sets that we analyze in the book that will teach you stuff about what these drugs do. And like I say, it's the first clear picture and pathway of like, okay, we acknowledge that they cause side effects if they're used incorrectly. But here's the actual science, and here's what the studies show. And if you actually use these as we recommend them, the studies agree with it. But you're not going to get the pharmaceutical companies to promote the studies that use low dosages, right? Because then they don't sell fucking product at massive amounts. So it's never going to be that game, but it's always available. And that to me is the beauty of the internet in the modern age is, bro, all you have to be able to do is find the data. It's out there. It becomes harder and harder to find it because obviously there are groups that run this level of reality that don't want us to find the data, but you got to be smart. You got to learn to find the people that are talking about the right data. And clearly right now, this is the first book that really demonstrates, okay, you might think this and be in the 95% and use them incorrectly, but maybe you should actually look at this book and understand that all those side effects that you think were caused by the drug were actually caused by you because you did not understand how to use these. And again, I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming the doctor that prescribed them to you. I'm blaming the pharmaceutical giant who recommended the high dosage to you, right? So that's fine. But at some point, every person has to take agency and ownership and say, hey, man, you know what? I need to give these a second chance because I did everything incorrectly. And that's the beauty. If you go on this Amazon right now and you read a bunch of the reviews, there's a lot of 5-star reviews that have come in the first week on the book. And I say there's probably 10 to 15 people that say, you know what? I'm so grateful for this book because now I'm looking at this from a different angle. And now I actually realize that what my doctor told me was bullshit. And I actually have to start looking at these from a different level. And that's the thing. It's like, hey, man, that's all it is, right? Because as we know, as we gain knowledge in the world, especially in science, we have to adapt and pivot as the information changes, as we become more aware. And that's the thing about me is like, I have no problem saying, hey, I'm wrong. And that's why I say, dude, at the end of the book, in the recap, in the summaries, I say, hey, man, as great as I love these 2 and 3 GLPs, these things are probably going to be irrelevant in a year, in 2 years. So again, it's incumbent upon you to educate yourself on how to use these responsibly in the context of health and longevity so that as the newer agents are brought into the marketplace, you already know what to do.
Wow. Okay. Somebody buys the book. They understand what they were doing wrong, what their doctors were doing wrong. They change everything. They start the microdosing. They do all the lifestyle things that you're suggesting. They're getting the protein, resistance training. for that person, is this a lifetime drug? It's another myth that you hear all the time for somebody. Is this a lifetime drug, or is there hope for somebody that like they can get to their goal weight, maintain all the benefits, and taper off of the medication?
I'm glad you asked that question because that's the best question anybody's asked me so far in 2 months of talking about this. It's not a lifetime drug. There's so much misinformation. In fact, I wrote the book to demonstrate how it isn't a lifetime drug, how we use it to get to where we want to go from point A to point B, maybe point A to point B, and then to C. And then I have a choice, right? I can completely change my lifestyle to the lifestyle that allows me to maintain this weight, to maintain this level of leanness, or I can come off every now and then and enjoy my life. Again, not become a glutton. But now I know I have this insane tool, which is getting better and better and better, that if I need to go back to it for 3 months, for 6 weeks, it's there. And I have the educational knowledge and the resources to use it productively, again, to live leaner, longer, stronger. And so, no, it's not a lifetime drug, but a lot of people become really, really empowered and really emboldened to be like, you know what? It's there. I'm not using it, but if I fall off the wagon or, I get sick, because look, that's another thing, right? Like, what happens if you break your leg? What happens if you tear your ACL? What happens if something happens, inexplicably, you're in a car accident and your body falls into hell or whatever, and you're like, well, fuck, in the back of my mind, I can go back on GLP-3 or GLP-4 or GLP-5, whatever it is. And I know in 6 months or 4 months, I'm going to be back to where I want. I'm going to be back in, call it fighting shape. So I just look at it as this ultimate tool that's never been there before. And let me actually liken it to this, right? Dude, for bodybuilding, for performance enhancement, there's never been a tool like this. When I talk to coaches, I'm right now in Columbus, Ohio. I'm here for the Arnold. I'm going to be walking around with my sales team and my affiliate guys, meeting with other people as we talk about some of these amazing products. One of which is our product, FLGR 242, which is recombinant follistatin, which is literally perhaps the greatest drug in the history of the world in that it actually burns fat and builds muscle at the same time. I don't want to rabbit hole on that, but the truth is that these drugs are radically changing bodybuilding, performance enhancement, physique culture, because you can create, and I say this in a podcast I was just on, and it's all over, it's going viral on the internet right now. But I said that these drugs, GLP-4 and 5, will have 375 to 400 pound professional bodybuilders on stage at 4 to 5% body fat. Now, 6 years ago, that was impossible. Listen, Casey, you know this. You've been a trainer for a long time. You've been around people that compete. You had to live a Spartanistic lifestyle and diet hardcore, do a lot of cardio, eat again, sacrifice carbohydrates, eat tilapia and green beans or whatever to get to a 4 or 5 or 6% competitive body fat level, bro. I can teach people today how to get to 5% body fat without even dieting. Do you understand what this is doing for the world? People like me with my knowledge in the bodybuilding world in the next 2 to 3 years are going to be offered insane amounts of money to get their competitor prepped without having to work hard. And again, I'm not saying to do that because bodybuilding is not about cheat codes or, metabolic minimization. It's literally about sacrifice, hard work, progress, working hard in the gym. But all I can say is that these tools make it a whole lot easier. And when I'm around other people like me now, we all joke about like in 2019, this was impossible. So literally fast forward 7 years, and now we have these amazing agents in microdosing. And of course, now we got small molecules and bioregulators that we can add in. And bro, like I said, we're building people who are they're mutants. They're fucking metahumans. It's X-Men. That's what we're creating, and that's where it's going. And so, like, to your question, it's the best question. It's not a lifetime drug. Nobody who does, the right things by doing a microdose and gets to that point of like, okay, now I've eroded the bad addictions from the food and everything else. Now I don't have that addiction. I don't have that emotional desire to eat crap when I'm feeling blue. But I also know that if I do fall off the wagon for whatever reason, I have that tool in my tool belt to go back to. And so that's why I think it's the greatest thing ever, because it comes down to human use. I mean, it comes down to the individual choice, right? Like, am I going to become a crutch or am I going to just use this when I need it? And for example, like in me and my wife's lifestyle, I mean, I'm 55 years old, 6'1" and 218 pounds and 6% body fat right now. I'm using little things here and now, but I'm not addicted to it. I don't rely on it. I know how to use that. I have a mastery of these things. And I think this is where it goes as people become more educated. They will have access to these tools to use them relative to their energetic demand in their life. If you're an Ironman triathlete, you might use a GLP-2 to suppress your appetite so you can be on a ketogenic diet for a week. To rely on fat as fuel so that it fuels your performance. If you're a bodybuilder, it's different. You're going to use a microdose of, GLP-3, GLP-4, GLP-5 to maximize muscle and lean muscle retention and also minimize muscle loss and maximize fat loss. So all of these tools will just be in the tool belt, in the arsenal of highly intelligent, educated, wise people to use at their discretion.
Amazing. Wow, Jay, this has been an absolute masterclass. I really appreciate all the information that you have gathered. Obviously, this is not something you learned yesterday. You've been doing this for a very long time, and you're able to bring it down to a level that was very understandable, very optimistic about some of this stuff. And obviously, people need to go out and pick up your book to deep dive into this. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy life to help us out and teach us today. Where would you like people to go to find you, connect with you and your work, and where can people go to find the book?
So first off, thank you for having me on your show. Thank you for being a very intelligent podcaster who asks great questions. You are awesome. I'm really grateful that I was here to share with you today. And thank you again for bringing the best out of me. The book is available on Amazon. It's available in audio, paperback. It's also a physician desk reference. So it's hardbound with gloss paper. And then of course there's the Kindle, and then the audio book should be available sometime in the next 3 days. As you know, with audiobooks, it takes longer from launch to actually get them so up in the system. The way that is it's all mess, but that'll be available. So all formats will be available. Best way to go is on Amazon. It's, internationally found. You can find me on social media at Jay Campbell 333. And then my website is jcampbell.com. Easily top 5 websites on planet Earth right now for peptide information and all the things that I talked about today. And I actually do have a domain that is set up for everybody who listens to me on a podcast to get all access to my free stuff, and which is really all my books except this book. But this book will be available within probably 30 days. But you can go and get any PDF that I've ever written or any book that I've ever written as a downloadable free PDF if you go to jcampbell.com/free-info. And all 8 of my books that I've written previously, 5 of which are international bestsellers. This is now the 6th because it is an international bestseller already after 10 days in the marketplace. But again, bro, I really appreciate you having me here today. I should also say, if you want to buy any of these amazing products that I talked about today, with the exception of GLPs, because GLPs now are not allowed to be sold by research or even compounders unless you have explicit use right from Lilly or Novo. Go to biolongevitylabs.com and use any affiliate code, which there are many, or you can just use mine, which is JAYC. If you want me to create one for you, bro, I'd be happy to. We'll probably just make it KCR, and you can save 15% off any product.
That's amazing. Well, that's very kind of you and very generous to offer all those free resources. We'll be sure to link all of that up in the show notes. And Jay, like I said, so grateful for your amazing work and for taking time out of your busy day to stop by and educate us. Really appreciate you.
I appreciate you, brother. It was awesome. I got to jump to this next call, but that was an awesome podcast. And if you need anything from me, reach out, okay?
You're the best. Thank you so very much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.